Welcome to the Attack Action Podcast,
where we talk about friendship, fun times, and most importantly, flesh and blood. Here are your hosts, Taylor and Isaac.
Hello, Attactioneers. Welcome again. Isaac, hello.
Once again, hello.
You were just, you threw me off because you have like your arms on your hips and you're like staring right at me.
Oh no, I'm just sitting in this regal chair.
Oh, okay. Got it. Because that has armrests. So I was a little thrown off by the signals you were giving me. I didn't know if you wanted to fight me or fuck me. Coming in hot, I guess, to the beginning of the episode.
Totally. If this is your first episode.
It is weird like this every time. So let us begin. Welcome to episode 40. Today we're going to talk about tempo, momentum, and pivot turns, and how all of those are related, not related, and why you should understand them.
Yeah, we have a real monster of a topic to try to tackle today. So we're going to be discussing these concepts as we understand them, and hopefully, arriving at some sort of better understanding of these concepts in order to play the game of Flesh and Blood better.
Totally.
God, I really butchered that.
No, I what you're really getting at is like tempo is pretty well defined in chess and Magic, right? But in Flesh and Blood, it's a little bit harder to kind of quantify and put your finger on. And so we are going to be attempting to do that so that the player base can more articulately, it's always funny when you mess up on that word, convey ideas and concepts to one another. So that's what we're aiming to do. And hopefully it works.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone who we reached out for, input, feedback, questions on this topic. And we're not going to run through the list of suggestions or questions. We're going to try to integrate all that input into our discussion. But thanks to everybody who reached out, your feedback was very much appreciated and got our, thoughts brewing on, some additional concepts and, understandings of this subject. But first,
shout outs.
Let's do it.
Okay. Who do you got, Isaac?
Brian Gottlieb. Sorry, I don't even know how to say your name correctly.
I think you nailed it.
Wrote an article on selling. This is a little while ago now, but wrote an article on selling PTIs, which I thought was very well articulated and thought out, like laid out. I'm still unsure on all of my feelings on this subject, but he pointed out a lot of things coming from a history of competitive professional TCGs that, I had maybe not weighed quite as strongly as I should have. So if you're conflicted or have feelings on this matter, go find that article. It's very good.
Yeah, it really was. And there was a excellent podcast, the Instant Speed podcast, and they had Brian on, and he outlined some of his main topics from that article, and it was a very good listen. I listened to that podcast the other day while I mowed my gigantic lawn. So
totally.
That's right. If you're a longtime listener, it's lawn mowing season, and both of my blades on my lawnmower are rusted on, and I can't take them off to sharpen them. So been trying to figure that out for a few days. So there's
nice.
The update.
And if you'd like a list of the 13 podcasts Taylor listens to in a row while mowing his lawn all day,
tweet at me.
Stay tuned.
So beyond just the Instant Speed podcast being great for mowing your lawn, I also want to shout out Brewtapcast. There's a lot of casts. They are a channel that emphasizes Fab and Magic, brewing budget and jank stuff. So they're pretty fun on Twitter, and give us some love every once in a while. So really appreciate that. Actually, just like Fab Twitter in general is really great. It's like small enough to where you basically know everybody who's saying everything, and it doesn't feel weird replying to tweets and stuff. It's great, and it's positive and hilarious.
Yeah, it's like a weirdly small community somehow, or at least in my Twitter bubble. You see a lot of the same voices and personalities.
Totally, it's great. So there's that. Those are my shout outs.
You got any more?
No, that's it.
All right, me too. I'm done.
Sweet. News section.
Well, Fab 2.0 has been released, which we can run down briefly, but it is a pretty beefy article. Go look it up and read it.
Yeah. And it's well written, easy to follow.
Yeah.
Unlike their last article, in Fab 2.0, new fresh face, doing great.
Yep.
All right. Hit me with some bullet points.
Okay. So in Fab 2.0, they are retiring the first edition versus unlimited set print run strategy, whatever you want to call it. Now there will only be, one iteration of the set, but it has a slightly different booster layout. There is still the normal rarity of cards, but there is a special slot in which cold foils and legendary cold foils will fall. Legendary cold foils are now like 1 in every 220 packs, whereas legendary rainbow foils also exist in the same set, and those are the 1 in 80 packs that legendaries have always been.
Yeah, so the big update there, right, is that there's no more unlimited, but we're going to have rainbow foils and cold foils all in the exact same booster set, but the cold foil legendaries get that fabled level of rarity, basically.
Right. Which means less cold foil legendaries for the rest of us.
Right.
Same amount of cold foil majestics and items, etc.
Right.
But any cold foil legendary you get will be extra special.
Yeah. And it's also will show up in the token spot inside a booster pack. So as when you're doing booster draft, it doesn't ruin the integrity of the draft by just picking value. You won't be able to use it, your token cold foil legendary in the draft, but you can use it in sealed. But so that's just to ensure the game of draft, the game within a game is remains intact. So that's really cool. I really enjoyed this change. I think it's way better. It means that for every player, the booster set is going to be more accessible because you don't have to wait for a second print run to get like the $20 discount or whatever. That was something I wanted to find out about so are we just doing like $85, $95 booster boxes still? Is the price going to change on those or remain the same as like first edition stuff? My guess is it remains the same as first edition stuff. But I think this is overall positive for sure. It's got to be, right? It's like way better. And now, like it says in the article, if you open a cold foil legendary, crazy moment, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be so sick.
Yeah, it maintains that, joy of opening booster packs. And, this is, keeps the joy of opening Fab for everyone. And, we were running into that a little bit where, if a new set came out, kind of closely before an event, you had to buy all first edition in order to have the cards to play in your event. And if somebody didn't, if you didn't have like a subscription or access to MSRP boxes, sometimes you'd be faced with the choice of buying boxes for hundreds of dollars just to be able to play, which, was just a result of the game expanding so quickly. But, I'm glad they fixed this now.
Totally. Also now we get history packs, which come out biannually, and those are going to have white borders, and they're going to just have key cards from the past sets. So that would be really cool. In the article, it shows too that there's like a tunic, a command and conquer, class specialization, those sort of things. So kind of like the cards that we need to have in rotation will be there, so we won't be getting stuff like Fervent Forerunner, potentially cards nobody plays and that sort of thing. So that's really awesome. Moving on, there is a renewed focus on the casual formats. So there's some changes to Ultimate Pit Fight. We are now using Commoner as an official format. And if you want to know more about our thoughts about the casual side of Flesh and Blood, check out our new episode of the Reaction Step, probably sometime after this podcast comes out.
Doesn't exist yet.
But it's coming. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So you have that. Let's see, what else? Also, shout out to Colin, the People's Champ, who just made a great summary on our Discord. Shout out to our Patreon. Get in on the Patreon so you can hang out with Colin.
And get sweet playmats.
Too late. You missed your window. It's all over. You have to wait until maybe next time.
Well, there'll be more sweet playmats, just different ones.
You never know, dude. Just saying.
So there's been an Elo revamp. Mm-hmm. You can check out all the details of that on the site. I guess the biggest takeaway from that is that ProQuests and Road to Nats now provide a bit of Elo, or however you phrase.
Yeah, sure.
Just getting a little small, little bit of Elo.
Yeah, a little ELO. Sweet. Yeah, I'm really excited about that because we were just talking about that change, how, there's plenty of stories in the community where this last ProQuest season, plenty of people top 8'd a number of events, maybe even got top 4 runner up, and they're obviously good enough to play on the Pro Tour, but since they didn't win a ProQuest, they have to go buy their PTI to get there, right? And so this will allow them to potentially have an ELO rating to qualify for that Pro Tour, even if they don't get the automatic qualification of winning an event.
Totally, yeah. It was a bit weird this past season because with a game with, some degree of variance requiring you to win a tournament to qualify, instead of, classically in TCGs, like top 8s and the like have been, kind of the barometer for skill level. So, the requirement of winning a ProQuest was a bit odd, and like Taylor brought up, is some people would top 4 multiple times, and it's like, so now buying a PTI just like feels really bad, but then also not being able to go feels really bad.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, 100%. So I really like that change, especially for myself, who like, I'm not going to Indiana for a calling. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I've like, a life. I got lawns to mow, Can't
totally. If you left for the weekend, your house would be submerged.
Oh, in grass for sure. Yeah. I swear to God.
Jungle.
I mowed and it grew back instantly in 3 days. It sucked. Anyway, the last thing I'm going to talk about, you can add another point if you want here. The last thing I thought that was really great is that there's now a suspended list for Blitz. So they did talk about in the article, well, not they, James White talked about how Blitz is for sure just kind of like an afterthought in terms of testing and development, and it's classic constructed and in draft. So things get a little broken in Blitz and make for not as fun of an experience, especially when they're promoting it as one of their main competitive formats. So that now there will be a suspended list where when cards are a little bit way above curve, they're not going to be usable, which I think is overall really healthy for that format, especially because we're like really close to it being actually really, really fun. This past skirmish season has been pretty good in terms of like parity amongst heroes and that sort of thing, and more decks feeling viable. So I think that's great. That's a great way to keep that format not broken, because it has been very broken for so long now. So
totally. Well, I think they like made it as an entry level format and a casual format, but then it became so popular that it is one of the main formats that the game was not designed to support or designed for, and so they're like running into these issues. So yeah, great.
Totally. Anything else off of that extensive article you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there's this last detail of signature weapons, whereas if a hero hits living legend status, which is a whole community can of worms at the moment, but if a hero hits living legend, their designated signature weapon will be banned along with them. So, Bravo's Anothos, Briar is Rosetta, Lexi is Voltaire, Kano is, Aetherbane.
Crucible, yeah. Chains is Galaxy Black. Yeah. So really glad that weapon's going to be gone as soon as Chains out of here.
Yeah, we could get back to a balanced game for once.
This is probably the only thing I have kind of a slight issue with. I don't particularly enjoy them taking away weapons, I don't know, Anothos is pretty well-rounded and could maybe work in a variety of Guardian decks and that sort of thing. Or, I don't know why, story-wise, when your hero is such a legend, they can't, bequeath their weapon to somebody else. You know what I mean? Yeah,
and we've never been in a position, except for the avoidance of the Duskblade meta, that,
right.
A weapon has been broken and oppressive in a format, right? I mean, you could argue some weapons are, above curve for sure. And, could have used some balancing, but it's never been a huge problem. And part of the fun of getting a new character is finding builds, and ways to use some of the diverse old weapons.
Yeah.
And it can be pretty fun. So I don't really understand the need to get rid of these weapons. Why?
Yeah, some of it would just be really weird too. If all the rune blades go, then the two weapons you have to choose from are Dread Scythe and Reaping Blade.
Yeah.
So that kind of sucks right now.
Yeah,
I mean, you could argue cool, who cares? Let's just get rid, But I mean, it's just something to think about.
Totally. Or if if Katsu goes, Kodachis are gone, so then Mask is less relevant. So then maybe they print a new thing. But it's odd.
Totally.
I'd like to hear the answer as to why
Yeah.
they chose to do this, because it wasn't something people were screaming for. Or
yeah, totally. Interesting choice. Maybe it's just an all-encompassing thing. I don't know. Then why not ban also Refraction Bolters and Helm of Eisen's Peak? And, I don't know. Anyway, Romping Club? I mean, come on. Then you only have claws for any brute you play?
Well, claws, or if you need to fall back on a more defensive strategy, you have to meat axe it. And then you're just fatiguing yourself as well.
Yeah, totally.
It's what?
I guess you could just Talishar.
I mean, they can just make more weapons, right? I guess.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of the deal here.
Totally.
Maybe they'll just print the same thing but with a different name.
Yeah, Blade, Shaunathy, Iron Song. He's just a dude with long blonde hair instead of Dorinthia.
Totally, Evening Blade.
They tried that. Dusk Blade.
Oh, right, they did.
Yeah, it's broken. Okay. Anyway. Getting weird. Anything else? I know we have some good listener mail you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we can move on to that. There's a big long Fab 2.0 article. Go check it out. All right. So we're going to, like I said, try to address everyone's questions and concerns about our main topic buried within the main topic in our discussion. But we did have one question that we were going to try to answer first at the top of the pod in our listener mail segment. So thanks, Mike Popovich, for posing this question. How do you make the decision if you should arsenal a card or use that card to apply more damage on the current turn as a way to maintain tempo? Taylor?
Great question. And that's from Twitter, correct?
It is from Twitter.
Okay, sweet.
Right, we get paid every time we...
Okay, so, well, Mike, I think it really has to do with the life totals within the game, right? Or the difference in life totals within the game. So, for example, if you pitch to swing your weapon to deal 4 damage and your opponent goes from 24 to 20 while you're at 28 health and you're foregoing your arsenal for that, not a great choice, right? But if it puts your opponent from, 8 to 4, and then all you, in theory, need next turn to survive is a 3-card hand, block with 1 card so you don't die, and then a 3-card hand to be able to strip enough cards from your opponent that they basically don't have a turn. So then the next turn after that, you can re-up on your arsenal. Then that would be the move. Or if you end the combat chain with something like Snatch, so your opponent has presented or hasn't blocked any of your damage and you're getting a little bit of a life lead and you end with Snatch, that's going to draw you a card to then be able to arsenal. That would be a reason to do that. So then now they maybe have to spend some armor and a card or potentially 2 cards, depending on where you are in the game or who you're playing against, to stop that from happening. That would be another great option. And then lastly, if it's one of your blue crap cards, that's just a resource card and maybe is going to be hard to play out of your arsenal, maybe it costs 2 or something like that. And you don't want it to get stuck in there. So you kind of have to then, this is the worst case scenario, then you have to kind of give up a bit of your tempo in terms of like the amount of cards you can play on your turn versus your opponent to keep that arsenal free to put something much more impactful for later in the game in there. Isaac, do you have anything extra you wanted to put in there?
I would just add that, knowing your matchups and knowing your deck's win condition or strategy are like pretty key here, right? Like, Dorinthia wants you within attack reaction range. Rhinar would love you at less than 2 for Reckless Swing, or even at like 10 or less for their big blowout turn. And that all just ties into like what Taylor said. If you're going from 20, getting them from 28 to 24, it doesn't really do anything unless for some reason that's your getting them to that life total is your win condition. So just knowing your steps to your win condition in that matchup and then deciding if, that's going to get you to that window you need or like execute your game plan, great, then play it. But, otherwise it's like almost always better to just arsenal it. And the last thing I would add in here is that I guess knowing the role of all of the cards in your deck, right? Like you talked about not getting a card stuck in there. So, if you're playing a Rune Blade and you can, just play a Swarming and threaten like 3 or 4 more damage, it's just damage. It doesn't do anything. But if you can arsenal it, next turn it's going to, create a Rune Chant, maybe turn on Rosetta. Like many cards that you would arsenal have additional functionality in your deck in terms of like enabling a bigger combo than the card itself. Mm-hmm. So anytime you play out that card, you're buying cards out of their hand or getting them to a life total that may be advantageous. But if those things aren't necessary, then keeping that card, if it's like part of your engine or combo or whatever, is just like so much more valuable.
100% agree.
All right.
So there you go. Great question, Mike. Thank you so much.
Totally. Just solving flesh and blood.
One tweet at a time. Okay. So let's move on to the main topic.
Nice. Let's get into it.
Okay. So we're going to talk about tempo today. But first, we're going to kind of define the three things that are kind of connected together, or that we've identified that are really connected together, and what they mean. And then we'll talk about how they all work, and we'll start lining out a lot of different scenarios and discussions and that sort of thing. So this is going to be pretty dense. So if you got to pause, take notes, feel free to listen to this episode a bunch of times. You've been warned that we're going deep.
Totally. Unless you're much more intelligent than us, then, might not be as dense.
Totally. I imagine too.
But this is a daunting topic to tackle for us.
When we start, like when me and you start talking about this, we both enter into like Queen's Gambit mode late at night when she's just like looking at the board and moving pieces in her mind.
Totally, but playing cards on the roof.
Yeah, totally.
That's how I spend most of my time.
Yeah, totally. That's how I fall asleep every night. Okay, let us first define momentum. Okay, so momentum we are kind of identifying as being able to play cards with no restrictions or interruptions. Now, this also could be defined as having or as tempo or having tempo, right? A lot of times they are the same, but the difference in this really becomes apparent when we start talking about control or OTK decks.
Right. Yeah, like maybe 95% of the time, momentum and tempo are, pretty interchangeable, right? Like in most aggro decks or mid-range decks, you want the freedom to be able to play out your 5-card hand, strip your opponent's cards, and reduce their life total, right? And if you're presenting so much damage that they have to block, then they lose cards, they don't threaten enough back, and then you get a 5-card hand to just like repeat the same process, right? So that's, that's what we're looking at as tempo, right? Is like the
momentum.
Momentum. Yeah. Is the ability to just play out your hands over and over. Your opponent's on the back foot.
Right. Okay, so that's momentum. And when we start talking about, like I said, OTK and control decks, it'll be a little bit more clear how that's maybe slightly different than tempo in certain situations. And you know what? We could also be convinced that it's the exact same thing and there shouldn't be that term as its own separate thing. Okay, let's talk about pivot or a pivoting turn. So a pivot is when a player with less tempo can pivot into becoming the player with the majority of tempo.
Right. So they go from losing the game or being behind to some degree to then pivoting and placing themselves in a better position, or a position where they're ahead, closer to their win condition than their opponent. Oftentimes having the momentum, winning the game, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, pivots come in all kind of shapes and sizes. I think a lot of times when you think of this, you think of the old block with armor, save all my cards as a pivot turn, right? It can also be just a subtle change in style of play or strategy of play over a few course of turns of the game, right? To where you go from primarily blocking, dealing damage where you can, to kind of maybe putting on a lot more damage pressure. And so that can be a way to pivot as well. But we'll get into that more as we move through the topic.
You want to revisit pivot later? Or
yes.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
Totally. Because we had a lot of questions in our Discord and on Twitter and stuff about pivoting specifically. And so we do want to address a lot of those, but we're going to get to that kind of later. So strap in.
Yeah. Cycle back. Go to minute. We'll talk about pivot.
Okay. So then let us define now tempo. So tempo originally comes from like music, right? A way of like keeping time. But then within games, it probably comes from chess first, right? And so, Isaac, how about you talk to us about chess tempo?
Okay, and apologies to any chess experts. I'm a chess novice. I just like the game. So if I misconstrued tempo at all, apologies. But within chess, tempo is defined as time or a turn. And in a chess game, you can see all of the pieces and where they all stand. So you can kind of tell who's winning or losing based on, potential outcomes from potential different lines of play, right? So tempo can be plural, tempi, and when a player gains a tempo, the other player loses a tempo. And it's a measure of how far ahead or behind you are. And again, in chess, it's like, the strategies are very complex, but it can be viewed pretty linearly like that, right? Because, if I'm threatening your queen or your piece or will be in the future, and it's going to take you 2 moves to get out of that and threaten me back, then maybe I have 2 tempi or 2 tempos. Right. And so you're behind in that way.
Yeah.
And then I can make maneuvers or take moves to further, put you in the hole, or you can make mistakes and get further from winning, essentially is what it is, right? Like, how many moves behind are you to get to the line where you win? And then your opponent has to, be on the defensive.
Yeah. The way I like to think about that too with chess, which I did play a couple of games of chess to kind of help wrap my brain around this podcast, is if I make a move advancing, my board state or winning the game, but my opponent can block that by also advancing their game state, then nothing has been really gained. But if my opponent has to immediately make a move to block what I have done, then I have gained tempo, right? And that's like a pretty simple form, I'm sure, right? But it just helps, I think, kind of illustrate that, because I only get 1 move a turn. And so if I have to use it to block whatever move you have done, or, vice versa, then I am not trying to win the game. I'm just trying not to lose. Right.
And changes in tempo usually come from some sort of mistake, right? Like your opponent, misinterpreting the lines you could take versus the lines they could take and making a suboptimal play, and then you can counter threaten or whatever, and then all of a sudden they need to play defensively. And I understand that this doesn't directly apply to Flesh and Blood, but I really like to think of the game this way because it helps you understand that, like, so if you watch back, so you played a game and recorded it, and you watch the whole game back, there may be instances where you lose a tempo or your opponent gains a tempo that can be, quite early. Like, you can make a suboptimal play when you're both at 30 health, right? Like, maybe you should have played this 1 card and blocked the 6 damage instead of playing these 2 cards and, taking 6 additional damage, because your win condition in that matchup is, would have been more optimally pursued this other way, right? So
yeah, no, I think that's great. I think we can also talk about how Magic kind of does it, right? Tempo. Yeah. And that'll help as we get in here to Flesh and Blood. So in Magic, right, like, you get to play land, you then get to tap your mana and play stuff, right? And so the resources on your board continually grow turn after turn after turn, right? And so if you continually get to play a land, you then have access to more resources. And so you're keeping pace, right, or tempo with your opponent who's doing the same. And if you have spells to cast that are equal to the number of mana you have out on the board, also helps, right? So you have one land, you have access to one mana, you get to play a one costed creature, right? And then the next turn you play your next land, and then you get to have a 2 costed creature, etc., right? And then as soon as you miss one of those, like you don't have a land to play or you don't have a creature to play when you have 3 mana out there.
Right, or you can't efficiently use all of your resources available that turn.
Yeah, so then you
would lose a tempo.
Yeah, you start to fall a little bit behind, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, totally. And just to to circle back to the chess thing, it's just, I mean, this is in the same vein. It's just so easy to look back on a game and think about crucial decision points in the end game, or maybe when you were both at 14 life and then you decide to take a big hit to then try to seize momentum, right? And it's a little bit less easy to identify, maybe not even misplays, but just suboptimal plays from earlier on. But if you look at the entire match as a whole map of you making plays towards your win condition in this matchup versus your opponent making plays towards their win condition in this matchup, there's a lot of very important decision points early as well. They just don't hold the weight or the gravity in your mind because you were not punished for them, initially.
Yeah.
But if you keep track of it, like when we were both at 37 health and then I made this kind of suboptimal play and I lost a tempo, then I'm down a tempo for the rest of the match, right? So then these other mistakes I make further down the line when we both have 11 health means I'm just like, I already started a bit behind and then I make another suboptimal play, or I don't have the flexibility to, regain a tempo or forward my win condition. Mm-hmm. So looking at it in like a kind of a linear scale like that, as far as just gaining or losing a tempo based on your decisions throughout an entire game, I think is a really good, lens to reflect on your matches. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Let's define tempo for Flesh and Blood to help everybody understand this stuff. So what we're going to say tempo is in Flesh and Blood is any play that moves a player closer to winning the game.
Yeah.
Right? Really simple. Really broad and extremely applicable to basically any deck or style of play there. The analogy that I like to think of it as is in Flesh and Blood, you can think of tempo as Tug-of-War, right? So the game starts, each player is equidistant from the line in which they have to cross to lose, right? And as the game goes on, the distance each player is from that line changes, right? So one player might have the vast share of all of the tempo and will be really close to winning, but hasn't won yet. Or it could be really close where they're like only a few inches or feet ahead of getting their opponent closer to that line, right? So, that's kind of the game of Flesh and Blood, is like trying to, get your opponent to cross that line before you do,
Yeah, try to fulfill your win condition or conditions before your opponent does.
Yeah.
Which part of that can be disrupting your opponent.
Yeah.
Or forcing them to play suboptimally, of course.
And like, I think too, with win conditions, it sounds maybe a bit fancier than it is, but some decks, it just literally is just don't block, deal all of the damage, race you to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Not fancy, not complicated. It's just simple like that. And that is like a viable strategy, as we have seen many times in recent metas, So don't think that because we say like win condition, it's like, I got to have all of these things line up and then boom, I win the game. It's like it's not that, right?
Right. Yeah. For a lot of mid-range matchups, it's about damage efficiency. Aggro matchups, you're just trying to output as much damage as possible, more than your opponent, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we kind of like, it's easy to just think of kind of momentum, or, the freedom to play your cards and your, opponent being hampered. Like momentum and tempo, it's just like oftentimes are the same thing, right? But then you start thinking about decks like, I'll throw out a few examples here we can talk about.
Well, before we get into like intense deck analysis, let's try to like kind of help set that stage a little bit better.
Sure.
So like, why or what makes tempo important to know and understand, right? So if you're like, I don't know anything about tempo, why are we making this podcast, basically, right? So can you answer that question?
So I think tempo is important to understand because that's a tough one. So a lot of times the way I think of it is it's kind of the freedom to forward your own game plan, right? Which a lot of times is dealing damage, right? Or if you're against a aggro deck as a, manipulative deck, maybe it's strip cards, et cetera, et cetera. But you have a game plan and a winning strategy against your opponent. And if you are freely able to pursue that, then you have tempo.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
All right, what do you got?
Okay. So the reason tempo is important to understand because it will inform your decisions throughout a game, right? So you can more readily understand like what cards you need to play, what cards you can block with, the amount of damage you can take, right? So the like turn to turn analysis that you make, if you have a good understanding of tempo, you can analyze how far behind or ahead you are, right? When the game gets like really tight. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's really easy to know that you have like all the tempo when you get to play 5-card hands into your opponent and they have like 10 health to your 35 health, right? Like that's really easy to analyze. But it's especially early in a lot of games, knowing those or just being able to analyze those first 5 turns or so, if your game is going to go beyond 5 turns, some games now don't, can really be impactful. Because like what Isaac was saying earlier, when you look at like the whole game and all of the decisions you've made, you can see how a little damage here, a little damage there can really add up to the game state at the end of the game. Right. That makes sense?
Yeah, so exactly. And so knowing your game plan here is like, because a lot of times you can just enter a game and just be like, well, I'm ahead on life and I'm maintaining this pressure, right? And my opponent's down by 10, and I've been stripping their cards and et cetera, et cetera. It just feels like I'm winning. But that's not always the win condition for every deck, right? So knowing those decisions early, like even if you're ahead on life, maybe your deck wants to dump their whole hand and block their attack out and maintain your life lead because you didn't see crucial components of your game plan, Mm-hmm. And without knowing that, very clearly, sometimes you won't know. Sometimes you'll think, oh, well, I'm ahead by 12. It's very easy for me to just take 6 to then play out my cards to pressure my opponent again. But if that's not the role of your deck or, your win condition in this match, then maybe that's not always the right decision.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. So there are some like scenarios that also help you think about tempo. So like, does having a health lead mean you have the majority of the share of the tempo in a game?
I mean, normally yes, but no. I think that they're separate.
Correct. Yeah. So you can definitely be behind in health, but have more tempo. So like OTK decks are a great example of that, right? So like when you think about Viserai and he has 15 rune chance and is maybe down by 15, 18 life, has plenty of health to pivot off of and still hit that Sonata and win the game, right? I think great examples also are Ice Lexi at Nationals versus Briar, right? There's plenty of examples of that on camera that you can go watch the Prince of Precision execute, where you go down, right, in those first couple of turns by a large margin.
Yep. Pretty much every game,
Yep.
I'm losing most of the game.
Yeah.
Not losing, but down on life.
But you are slowly like gaining little bits of tempo over the rest of the game, right? And making those turns of Briar like way more manageable for you to handle, and then still whittling away their life to where there's a parity in life totals, and then now you're winning and have more of the share of tempo, right?
Yeah, that's a good example because there's very clear-cut steps to my win condition in that situation, right? So like chipping through armor, stripping some degree of cards every turn, right? And then ideally denying them arsenal or manufacturing a turn where they have less earth tokens, right? And then you hit this point where we're both kind of at 13 life, but they don't have an arsenal, they don't have any armor, and like, then I win the game. So knowing those steps and knowing how I gain tempo, as you pointed out, it's like that really enables your decision making when you're both, when I'm at 34 life and they're at 38.
Yeah.
You know the decision points to gain tempo, even if it might cost you some life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, another example too of like, so like Guardian players, right? So you can be on quite a bit lower life, right? But then you get off a Crippling Crush and they don't have any armor left. So they get crushed by Crippling Crush and you get a bunch of cards off of them, right? And so now they have like a pretty muted turn that isn't very threatening, and you've stolen the majority of the tempo in that game and then potentially can leverage that to win. Now, that's not always the case depending on what the life totals are, right? Like they could just go from 28 to 24 again, okay? And they don't have any cards to play with, and then you just sit back and get into like Seismic Surge token hammer, Anothos for 6 or whatever, which is cool because then maybe they'll wind up taking 10 damage over 2 turns, but are not like close to dying and have no reason to block Anothos whatsoever. So then can start to regain momentum and regain those points of tempo back from you.
Totally. And that's why understanding your opponent's like capabilities and win conditions in your matchup is essential to, weighing these decision points, right? Like you have to understand what they're trying to do and, not be in a position where they're going to beat you.
Yep.
In addition to knowing your own game plan, you have to understand theirs and their, potential threats, their average threats, weigh the risk versus reward of their, capabilities. Mm-hmm. Another couple that like Prism and Kano both play most games on lower life.
Yeah.
While winning the game oftentimes.
Right.
While oftentimes life total is a good indicator of who's ahead, it is certainly like completely unrelated.
Right. Yeah. You have to take into account like the whole game, the board state, all of that stuff. Here's a little question for you. Can you have too much tempo?
No. I would say some decks are unable to capitalize on having too much momentum. Sometimes like Oldhim
Right.
with 5 cards
Yeah.
can really brick. But as we define tempo, you're just steps ahead of your opponent
Right.
to winning the game.
Yeah. And the more you have, the better.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally. Okay. So let us then kind of move on. So let's kind of talk about something we've been talking about a lot leading up to this podcast is kind of the difference between momentum and tempo, right? So when, let's say in the previous meta, right? Or it could be now, but we have OTK Viserai versus Oldhim, right? And so in a classic matchup of that fashion, Viserai is wanting to play outside of the realm of momentum based playing, right? And just give it all to Oldhim, because if they play that game, Oldhim will just have more tempo in every exchange and just grind out Viserai. So Viserai has to play outside of that realm and give up all of the momentum to Oldhim to where they can continually, arsenal cards, play all 5 cards into Viserai. And then the decision point that they have to make is how much damage can I afford to take while still making rune chance and not blocking with all of my sonatas, so then I can't win the game, right? And knowing how many rune chants you have left in the deck to make. So you have this balance of all of these calculations, but both decks have some amount of tempo, right? Even though the Viserai player isn't attacking Oldhim on every turn, right?
Right. And so these examples are kind of the reason we sat down and we're like, wait a minute, like tempo and momentum are not the same thing, right? Because like in this first example, and I've felt this too playing against, because as Lexi, sometimes you play against OTK Viserai, and it's like, if you always have momentum, you have all of it. They can't attack once, otherwise their rune chants are popped and defeats the purpose. But, if they block with 3 cards, make some rune chants, block with 2 cards, make some rune chants, and you are unable to slow their rune chant production,
or kill them fast enough
to or deal enough damage, in relation to that. Sometimes you'll look up and just be like, oh, they just made more rune chants. They're on 11 rune chants and they still have 32 life. I haven't leaked enough damage in regards to how many rune chants they've created, right? So I have full momentum. They're behind on life. Maybe they're even missing a piece of armor, but Viserai has tempo now, right? They're winning the game.
Yeah.
They're closer to their win condition than I am to mine.
Right.
Right. So this is like a very clear cut example of like momentum is not tempo, know?
Yeah. And I think another kind of maybe more complicated example of that is recent Prism decks, right?
Yep.
So you could be just chaining 5-card hands into Prism, but Prism could also be at the same time kind of building a board state and, getting cards into Soul, whether that's through auras or just hitting with like a non-threatening Herald and that sort of thing. And what they're slowly doing is trying to get enough of a board state to where they can leverage that advantage of like having 4 auras out to where the exchange becomes in their favor, right? So like they'll block with 3 cards, but then maybe make a spectral shield and then attack you for 5 one time. And it's really inefficient to block 1 damage with a whole card that blocks for 3. And by doing so, you would be giving up, some of your tempo, because that exchange is like really not worth it. So until you're at low enough life, those attacks don't matter. But they're doing 5 damage to you every time and creating a spectral shield, and so gaining a health. So really it's like a 6-point swing. And if you're only doing like, 2 damage, 3 damage, you're losing all of those exchanges depending on like what the health totals are at, right? But then that's why you can see so many Prism games, like they're at 9 health and you're at 20 or whatever. And you could be losing that game even though you have like that higher life total.
So far behind.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, like a good example of a turn in this kind of scenario is just like so if you threaten Prism with a bunch of damage but no hit effects, right? Or like not enough control effects. So then Prism takes more damage and goes down from 25 to 15, say. And then on their turn, they play out 2 more auras. And now they have 6 auras and 15 life. And you're at, 32 life. Right? They have not stripped any cards from your hand. They haven't really gained any momentum in terms of the like push and shove of like a typical mid-range game. But they have greatly forwarded their game plan, and they probably have tempo over you in this scenario, right? They have too many auras to pop. They're, definitely going to steamroll you here. But you're winning by so much as far as life totals go. And I think that Prism matches from the other side, playing against Prism, is a really good example of understanding tempo. Because in these matches, like every deck has to tackle it differently. But understanding when to counter Prism's board state or win condition versus when to push damage or pressure their hand or even block yourself occasionally or maybe early is like really crucial and a very, high level of flesh and blood play to correctly decision make against a Prism opponent for the whole game.
Yeah. And if you look at the Indianapolis calling finals, you can see just how well Michael Hamilton understands this concept of tempo and knows Prism's capabilities and that sort of thing, and aggressively takes down auras when he can, so that the Prism player cannot gain too large of an advantage, and then activate Starvo when is appropriate and that sort of thing. And he does a really good job of making sure the exchanges are either equal or slightly in Michael's favor. So that's a great game to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
These concepts through. What else? What else have we talked about? Should we talk about armor blocks and pivoting, or do we want to stay on this did we miss some stuff about...
I have one more example.
Cool. Yeah. We could keep going with different deck examples to help everybody understand. But
this one may be a little more debatable, but I was thinking... So when we were thinking about these examples of momentum and tempo being different, I did think about playing Kano. And, like in Kano or in classic combo Rhinar Claws from the Crucible era, playing an energy potion is like maybe optional in Rhinar, you could argue. But in Kano, there are times when you attack them on your turn, so you're trying to gain some momentum by stripping a card out of their turn in order to either push damage through again on their turn or to just mitigate some of the damage that they can deal back to you. So sometimes you are vying for momentum, but there's these completely separate points in the game, sometimes that are fairly generic, like placing an arsenal, a key card. But playing an energy pot is oftentimes part of your win condition for Kano. I mean, you can certainly win games without it, but at least in my novice experience, oftentimes you gain a tempo by playing an energy pot, and it is a core part of your win condition with that deck. So, when I'm playing that deck most times, if I play an E-pot, I feel like I gain a tempo, but it has nothing to do with damage exchanges or momentum shifts or whatever.
Yeah, totally. I think The energy potion in Kano is like a really interesting thought experiment, because you definitely do gain a tempo, right? But it's like, it's a bit theoretical, because if you just die and never use that energy potion, then it did nothing, right?
Totally. Then your opponent has tempo or is several steps ahead of you, and you don't have tempo. So then I guess it's not.
Yeah.
So if you rewatch the game and then you win as Kano, I think that is a moment where you gained a tempo.
Yeah.
And then there's several more, and
sure.
then you
Yeah.
win the game. But if you lose, then maybe you gain a tempo there and then lose tempo later. I'm unsure. It's a complex thing to consider in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, definitely. And you could probably say like, well, every aura I play out in Prism is a theoretical tempo, and that sort of thing. But I would counter that they kind of aren't, because those are like threats you will have to deal with at some point, right? If they get too many out there.
And those are fairly interchangeable. Like each one is not a crucial component.
Yeah.
I just thought of the energy pot in Kano because that's like a very specific card.
Right.
That is a critical play, almost,
Yeah, it definitely helps you win the game, but only if you like win the game.
Yeah.
So that one's really interesting. If you have any thoughts about that, please like tweet at us or leave a comment on the YouTube page, and that sort of thing. Let's see what else, right? I think that's it.
I mean, that's the, like you said, there's millions of examples, but
yeah, totally.
And those certainly aren't the only ones. Those are just kind of like some of the prominent exceptions to the classic momentum tempo.
Yeah.
Exchange in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah. I think we'll probably talk about more and how they relate as we talk about pivot turns and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we got a ton of kind of questions about pivot turns, how to have the correct pivot turn, how to identify pivot turns, blah, 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 blah. Who's a pivot turn? How do I pivot turn? Where's a pivot turn, etc. So I want to be clear about pivot turns, that they are not like this kind of, oh, I've correctly identified my pivot turn and now I'm going to come from behind and win. That is like not the rule. That is the wild exception and probably actually never happens.
Right? Or like I drew my pivot turn and found it. Oftentimes drawing a crucial piece of your game plan is part of maybe manufacturing a pivot turn.
Right.
But it's not like, oh yeah, I drew my hot combo and now I can take damage to pivot. Sure, you have to identify those moments. But a lot of times you kind of manufacture a pivot turn leading up to it.
Yeah, you don't just go, oh, these are the right 5 cards. Thank God I have enough life. I'm going to win now, Like, it just doesn't happen like that. So pivot turns are a strategy that is a part of your overall game plan to win. And very rarely a pivot turn is a spontaneous come from behind play. Most notable in mid-range decks that want to change their strategy partway through the game. So like kind of the mid-range dash deck of back in the day, wanted to block a lot, grind you down with pistol, get out 2 chambers and, maybe a purifier, right? And then manufacture either like a high octane turn where they do a couple of boosts, gain a bunch of action points, and come in with the pistol for a bajillion times.
Yeah.
Right.
Or just shift gears and start, all of a sudden their damage output is a lot greater than yours. So then they can
because
pivot.
they've been stacking all of their mechanologist cards, so now they can 0 cost boost, and you don't have the health total to take 10 or 12 damage or whatever.
Yeah.
But they do, right?
Yeah, and Levi is a great example of this because you kind of block out, build an engine, and then you choose a turn to pivot, and you kind of manufacture this place. And once you do pivot, you don't really have a choice to unpivot.
Yeah.
In like classic Levi builds.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you have your blood debt engine going.
Right. And that's one of the reasons, right, they like printed Husk is to help you with that, right?
Yeah.
To like absorb a huge amount of damage to then put the pressure back on your opponent, right? But they just don't come out of like thin air most of the time.
Yeah, right? I mean, so I would counter that there is, there like is a situation where you can fall behind, right? Like you can get a bit unlucky, or your opponent can get very fortunate or surprise you with their strategy, right? Or maybe you make a misplay and then you do have to maybe change your game plan a bit or what you were going to do. And so like, I guess my argument here is that a pivot turn can be kind of manufactured on the fly or improvised if need be.
Right.
But ideally, and your game plan is not that.
Right. Yeah. Control decks are built around this idea, right? So like, again, to Oldheim, just block, ice hammer every turn to get your life total low enough to where once you are far enough out of threats that your turn becomes so manageable that they can save more cards and apply more pressure to your life total, making it so you have to spend your cards blocking rather than attacking, right? Is a really classic example of like pivoting, right?
Yeah, just quick side note here. Also, fatigue decks are a good example of like an odd case of tempo, right? Because they may be, they never have momentum either, or maybe at the end they do. Right. But they may, if you're not leaking any damage through to against a fatigue deck, they have tempo. They're winning the game, right, as your cards just crash against their solid wall and you don't do anything.
Right.
So very clearly winning, very clearly have tempo, not attacking or maintaining momentum whatsoever.
Totally. So let's talk about armor blocks then and how they're related to like all of these things. Right?
Yeah.
So biggest mistake I see all the time still, which is wild because I feel like the information on armor blocking or just the mantra of save it for as late as possible is like widely known, but still people like will block with their armor extremely early, thinking that which can be a strategy, right? They're trying to like keep tempo by just like using their armor to block. But it's like not as necessary when you're at 30 health as it is when you're at 5 health. Right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different ways to like use armor, but a huge one in Flesh and Blood is to save your armor for really late in the game when perhaps both of the opponents are on low life, like you're both at like 4 or 5, but you still have 2 or 4 armor worth left of blocking. You essentially have 4 extra health that your opponent has to grind through to win the game, and they don't have any armor, so you can like leverage that against them and use your armor and key parts to keep maybe a card or 2 that makes your turn like a little bit more threatening, and then forcing them to block with more cards than they really want to, and then that makes their turn more manageable, and then because their turn is more manageable, you still get to keep more cards, and then you've gained incremental tempo advantage there, and you're able to like close the game out, right?
Totally. And this doesn't always in the fast meta we're in now, this doesn't always apply to like super low life totals. If you're holding a hand that does 18 damage, identifying that you can use your armor or maybe 1 card and save a bit of armor, maybe 1 card and a piece of armor to then pivot and just really hammer down at your opponent.
Or just kind of keep kind of your, your couple of points of tempo advantage, right? Like they're presenting a fair share amount of damage, but you can maybe just spend a card and a piece of armor to kind of block out a key card that kind of keeps their damage ceiling within tolerable levels while continuing to apply still plenty of pressure on your turn, right? Can keep you like slightly ahead in the game as well. But that's a little bit more nuanced and takes quite a bit more practice in the matchup.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, we'll circle back to like knowing your opponent's capabilities and win conditions, because sometimes you'll, like say Prism has a floating resource, but also Tunic up, and you think they're going to, Herald you, like War Tune you, right? But then they Erudition you and you like have to block it. Right. So then that surprise buys a piece of your equipment and a card, which is unfortunate and sometimes happens. But you have the equipment saved for that scenario because against Prism, hopefully you're not using it to block a wave of one attack auras.
Yeah.
Hopefully have maintained control over that aspect of the game and are saving it, to block Erudition, essentially.
Yeah, totally. And, all of that, and that's a really great complex example that kind of brings potentially everything together, because if that's the first Erudition you've seen, right, then potentially Prism has gained a few points of tempo there, because now you have less armor to block their next Erudition that they come in with, and even less when the third one comes in, and maybe that's when they kind of run you over in the damage race, right? So now you're trying to make those exchanges between the next Erudition in your favor, so that if it does come along and connect because you don't have the armor to block it, you don't fall so far behind that you can't win the game.
Right.
And
some of these, and I guess in kind of an ideal matchup, you can use your armor to pivot, right? Manufacture this pivot turn.
Yeah.
Or you can identify a window in which you pivot, and then you can use your armor to maintain momentum and or tempo, right? But sometimes the use of armor is kind of like if you're playing against Katsu, you can kind of bleed out your armor a little bit to block Kadachis, or maybe a piece of armor and a card to block a crucial mask hit, just to turn off mask and then hammer down and have favorable damage exchanges just from turning mask off at crucial points by like using your armor intermittently. So it does vary quite a bit, but
yeah, definitely. And so like then the real question is, right, how do you identify how to use your armor to help you either pivot or maintain your tempo advantage? And my answer to that is like reps matter, right? You can't just like show up against somebody and they don't know your deck, you don't know their deck. It's like two brand new decks, and you can't just be like, this is the rule of thumb always, unless it's the save your armor for as late as possible scenario, right?
Yeah, it's like night and day. I've played a deck, like I've made a deck that's favorable in a matchup and just lost by 20 because I didn't know how to play it or play the matchup.
Yeah.
And then as you learn that,
then you can more adequately use your armor as blocking tools as you need, right? You understand the importance of that. And this is just a great rule for life in general, right? There are no hacks to just, there's no shortcuts, right? You have to put in the work to improve and identify that stuff, right? And so hopefully, right, through this podcast, you can then start to like play your next game and think about the kind of like tempo exchanges and try to start training yourself to think about that. I think most people probably, do the quick math of like, okay, I'm going to take 12 damage, but I'm going to do 15 damage, right? That seems good. But maybe it isn't the best exchange based on like where your, life totals are, how many cards are left in deck, what they've played, what you've played. that sort of thing. This might be the last 18 damage turn you have in the game, and your opponent might have recognized that and you didn't. So it gets kind of complex, but it just takes practice to think about.
Yeah, and so I guess a way to like dial it back, and a good place to start maybe is just to know how your respective decks behave at each chapter in the game, right? Like when you each have 5 life, or each have 10 life, or 15 or 20, how does that matchup play out? Do you have advantage at this life total? If you pivot at this life total, et cetera, how does that play out for your deck and your strategy? I think it's just like a good thing to look at initially, because some decks excel when you're both at really low life. Some decks excel when you're both at 15 life. Mm-hmm. And so just identifying that will make it like, I guess, easy to understand or implement what we're talking about, just kind of at a base level, right?
Yeah, totally. So there you go. I hope this was informative. I hope we made sense. And I think we made sense. So I hope that was enjoyable. We do have some signature segments to end with here for you to kind of cleanse the palate. You can put down your pen and paper or stop typing furiously or whatever you need to do. So we have Pick, Pass, Pray up first. So Isaac, this is a draft scenario. I'm going to give you 3 cards.
I miss draft.
I do
Although
too.
we drafted Arcane Rising the other day, and maybe now that I'm a better player or just better at draft, I don't know, but I loved it.
Yeah,
it's a great
fun
draft set. I'm sorry that the world missed out on Arcane Rising. I know it's kind of like wonky and weird maybe, but
no, it's so sick.
It was great.
I was just living my best Ranger life and just freaking pitch stacking and
totally
and just crushing it. It was so fun.
It's just because there was no era of that, I guess, but it's just like, it's really good.
Yeah.
And all of the generics that, and some of them kind of janky, are all like just very well crafted to that set in limited play.
Totally.
So great job, LSS.
Yeah.
Sorry we all missed it due to unforeseen pandemics.
Lead the charge into Moonwish. Put your arrow on top. Azalea it in. Boom.
Totally.
Red in the ledger, 5 dominate.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Great play.
Totally. Thank you. Okay. Draft scenario. I'm going to give you 3 cards. One of them you're going to pick. One of them you're going to pass. And one you're going to pray comes back around. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Our first card up is Entwine Lightning Yellow. Pitches for 2, costs 0. Is an elemental attack action. Attacks for 3, defends for 2, has lightning fusion, and reads. If Entwine Lightning was fused, it gains Go Again. Okay. Second card, Rites of Lightning. It's an elemental rune blade attack action. Pitches for 3, costs 1, attacks for 2, defends for 3, also has lightning fusion, and reads. When you attack with Rites of Lightning, if it was fused, deal 1 arcane damage to target hero. If you have dealt arcane damage this turn, Rites of Lightning gains Go Again. The third and final card, Crackerjacks. It is generic equipment arms. Defends for 0 and reads. Action. Destroy Crackerjacks. The next attack action card you play this turn gains +1. Go again. So Isaac, which one are you going to pick? Which one are you going to pass? And which one are you going to pray comes back around?
I'm going to pick Rites of Lightning Blue, my favorite card in Aria Limited. I hate that it's a blue. That sucks. But at least it does 3 damage, and you need to pitch a card anyway to pay for Rosetta, right? So like a free non-attack, pitch a yellow, play this is still very productive and very good, right? It blocks for 3. It's also a blue, which you don't need that many of, but not bad for a resource card. I do like Entwine Lightning. Unfortunately, it's not the red. And Crackerjacks is pretty good, but is just not, like Mark of Lightning I think is excellent. Cracker Jacks is pretty good for Thump, and Ball Lightning Red, really good there. But just like a little bit less applicable, maybe. I'm probably wrong here as I say this. I think there's chicks that pick the equipment. I'm gonna pray then Twine Lightning Yellow comes back around just because I'm dipping into Lightning Hero hair, and it's also a Gogan attack to get to Rosetta.
Sweet.
What do you think about these cards?
It's kind of
interesting
tough.
one.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna pick Cracker Jacks because of its kind of broad application, and I do value being open. And it's kind of like, tier 1.5 on the equipment list in Tails. So I'm happy to pick those up. Maybe Mark of Lightning isn't going to come around. Maybe I'm not even in Lightning, right? And then if I'm in Ice, it's kind of the best arm slot for that, or Earth. So I'm going to pick Cracker Jacks. I'm going to pray is the word, for Rites of Lightning. A blue, you pitch it, right? You see it late game. Hopefully you can fuse it and it deals that last crucial bit of arcane damage you need to win the game. And then I'm going to pass on Entwined Lightning Yellow. It's pretty cool that it's, free and can get go again, but it doesn't have a break point. It doesn't really block. It does pitch, which is kind of nice, but the Rites of Lightning kind of just does a little bit more if I'm going to be in a Lightning deck, and it just does more. It just has an ability to win the game over Entwined Lightning, so I'm going to pass on that. So there you go.
Nice.
Sweet. What's next, Isaac? Board game from the closet?
Board game from the closet. So it's going to be a little different this time. I did not have a board game from the closet to share, but I wanted to recommend Elden Ring to everybody. I know everybody's already playing it, but I haven't played any video games in years, and this game is just excellent in so many ways. But my favorite part is that, maybe not my favorite part, one of my favorite parts is that it doesn't like give you clear cut like quests or goals or like a giant beacon to run to and just blow shit up on the way and then you did it. It'll give you like, somebody will say something kind of cryptic and you're like, what? And then that's it. And you got to go fucking figure it out yourself, so go figure it out. And you have to like play with patience and like deliberation, I guess.
I think there's like a large amount of humor in that game too. Like the amount of times you die, sometimes the way you die.
Oh yeah, it's pretty funny.
And it's like super funny too. It's like you come into this beautiful vista and there's just like some dude like chopping wood in the middle of the field. And you're just like, right, I got to go talk to that guy. And then he just says something weird and cryptic, right? And then you just like kind of move on with your day. Like that was a weird experience, but the weird cryptic thing he might said like is really important, or he says his thing and then you turn around and a bear pops out of nowhere and rips your head off,
Totally.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it is pretty funny. That happened. I was like, I'm going to shank this stupid guard standing here facing the other way. And then, Grizzly landed on me and ate me. Also, I started the game early and was like, I was pretty good at Dark Souls. I bet I could take this knight right out of the gates. Instantly died right away. There's also one part where you warp to some random place and then you just walk to the edge. It's just ground. And then the edge breaks and you just fall to your death and lose all your souls that I had left somewhere else for no reason.
Oh, so
anyway.
Funny. Yeah. Great game. So one from our digital closet there. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for sticking it out. This is a little bit heavier than our podcast usually is, but we're going to try to do kind of maybe these more bigger topics as we, move forward.
Yeah, interspersed as we're comfortable with.
Yeah, totally. We're trying to line up a really great interview with On It from Fab Foundry. Really great person, and he's been a supporter of ours since the very beginning. So we're hoping to get him on the pod in the next couple of weeks. So you have that to look forward to. Don't forget to check out our reaction step. We're going to talk about the casual player. So far from the days of tempo.
Totally.
I
have a last takeaway. I just want to...
Wonderful. I
want to reiterate. So if you ever think about the game you played or watch your game back or whatever, try to think about every decision point from the very beginning, right? Of whether you lost or gained a tempo making that play, right? Even if it was just suboptimal, not the ideal play. Maybe you didn't clearly start losing, but if you think about every decision in those terms, especially the first half of the game when the stakes are just as high, but you just don't realize it yet. I think that can be helpful to critically thinking about your own performance.
Sweet. Sage advice from a prince.
Prince of Sage.
I don't know how to end it this time. Appreciate you all, and we'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.
Good night.
Thank you for listening. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at the Attack Action Podcast. On Twitter, we are at BattleBroTaylor and at BattleBroIsaac. Shoot us an email, theattackactionpodcast@gmail.com.
If you would like to support us, like and subscribe, shop for singles using our affiliate link, or support our Patreon for as little as $4 per month.